Welcome to the Liberated Feminine Podcast. I'm Lucy Lampy, your host, and in this episode, this is a particularly tender one for me, but I really feel like it's time. We're talking about spiritual discernment. There are so many different angles that this message is coming in, and I'm still in the process of sifting it, but it felt really important to share this conversation with you now. And a part of this is also revealing more about what really happened in my divorce and how it was so sudden, and yet also not so sudden, but the process behind it and what that has to do with spiritual discernment, and also what that has to do with the recent episode of the Aubrey Marcus podcast where he shared the dynamic that he and his wife and his new partner are in. But this is not a conversation about polyamory or monogamy or relationship constellations. It's not a conversation about plant medicine. It's this intersection of all of it. So I will begin by saying that what I'm seeing, the deeper conversation that's emerging from that podcast that he shared about their new relationship dynamic, the deeper conversation is about spiritual discernment. That plant medicine, for example, can be a powerful catalyst and healing tool and an intelligence that we tap into. However, it is not the end-all, be-all that can override or was ever meant to override your choice and your integrity and your commitment to what you are doing, how you are relating, what you are creating in this 3D reality. Now, a lot of times when we're having these plant medicine journeys or in altered states of consciousness, we can receive these beautiful visions, insights, remembrances, and also, they can kind of stay out here in the outer realms. Let's say you can see the higher truth that, let's say, everyone is choosing exactly their soul path, that everyone is exactly where they're supposed to be. And yet, in that, if you don't ground in this human experience that we're having, you can easily bypass that there is real suffering happening. So, I just want to leave you with that general example first. And when in the podcast that Aubrey shared, when he talked about receiving a message from Isis in the temple, it just took me right back to some of these experiences that I had with my ex-husband. So to give you a little bit more context, and I'm not going to tell you every single detail, there are still parts that I am figuring out how or if to talk about, because it is not my story to tell. His story is not my story to tell, but my experience within that is. And so what I will say is that there was a period of time where he was taking plant medicine a lot. I'll just leave it at that. It was a lot. It didn't leave time for integration. And I remember how unsafe that felt to my system, and how in that period of time of about a year is when I really learned how to cultivate that inner safety despite the uncertainty of not knowing in what state he was going to show up, if he was going to be completely ecstatic or really paranoid. And that was a really difficult year for me and our kids. And so after that year was complete and he felt that there was no more need for that was around the time that coincided with the closing of the relationship container, which I discovered within the first, 6 months of opening our relationship at that time some years ago, that it wasn't really what I ultimately wanted. That my greatest freedom wasn't found in having all the options available to me, but that it was found in knowing what I am deeply devoted to. And so I asked, can we focus on the two of us? This is becoming very depleting. Constantly being on the lookout for people that we could potentially be playing with, and the energy involved in having someone come into our field, into our relationship space. And it began to feel very intrusive and invasive, and just depleting. And so we tried to do that, to close the container. And again, in that period of time, I got to really learn, what does safety feel like to me in my body? I didn't feel that it was time to leave. In fact, interestingly, in a plant medicine journey, what presented as the goddess told me, you're going to have to leave him. And I was so confused and devastated. I thought, what the fuck? Because that message came in so clearly. However, this was some years before the divorce actually happened. And so, of course, I also knew to not just take it at face value. This is that spiritual discernment piece. I sat with it. I questioned it. I inquired deeper. I said, what does this mean? Maybe, does this mean, is this metaphorical? Does this mean that there is some part of some past version of the relationship that I meant to, close up and say goodbye to? Okay, we had done that many times. And I just kind of left it at that. And I stayed focused on the work that I was devoted to doing within myself, within the relationship, within my family, within the work that I was doing in the world. And around that time, my work started to shift more into the realms of sacred union, divine union. And I began sharing more about that. I started to get these messages, these downloads, we could call them these codes, to what that would feel like and look like in that experience, in my human experience. And I began to experience more of that in that marriage, without all of the distractions of outside energies coming into our relationship. However, and this is the piece about the plant medicine and the overlap between that and spiritual discernment. During the time that he was not doing plant medicine, he was more grounded and more attuned to this reality and the things that we were doing in the day-to-day. And that was the year that everything it just really took off. And I was on these big podcasts. A lot of you, perhaps listening to this message right here, found me on one of those podcasts during that period of time where there was more safety, there was less feeling of instability around other people entering the relationship and having clarity about that being closed. And I was able to use that energy that I had been using in my hypervigilance in that particular context towards creating, towards serving, towards building, towards loving, in a way that just, I was able to soften the most that I had yet in the marriage. Whew. And we needed that. We needed that whole full year of just beautiful family experiences, all this expansiveness, all this growth, all this depth. However, there came a point, again, bringing back this piece of discernment, there came a point where a good friend of his who recently, not too long after this happened, actually passed away on unknown causes. He gave him something that he said it was one thing, but the way that it affected his system seemed to be something else. And after such a long stretch of not having wildly altered consciousness experiences. He had this experience. And it's like something snapped and settled into a new place, and it did not go back. And so, in retrospect, I came to find out that that was the time, that final month, that was the time that he was receiving all these messages from what he perceived to be God about having this other wife, about her visiting, appearing out of the blue, about us being a happy throuple. And he believed the visions that he saw. And that is why our marriage ended. Not because of polyamory, not because I wanted monogamy and he wanted to have other options, but because fundamentally there was I don't want to say not a filtration to those messages, but visually what it seems like to me, how I experienced it was that he was a very open channel receiving these downloads, these messages. And they may have been true, let's say from a higher perspective, that okay, you are meant to love everyone equally. You're meant to believe in miracles. You're meant to, live in the space of complete trust in the universe and not lock your doors at night and do things that appear to be reckless in faith. Right? It's that wisdom wasn't grounded into the human version of it. And that has very real consequences. Hence, I am on a different timeline now. I'm on a different timeline in a different life, having a new child with a different man in a new partnership in a new country. And for that, I am so, so, so grateful, because this is what my soul was calling in. This is what my heart deeply desired. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it, with a man with the spiritual discernment, to hold both realities of this higher truth of spirit and this grounded soil, fertile land reality of our human existence. So my partner now, when he has these plant medicine journeys, yes, maybe there's a message that comes through. That doesn't mean you have to do it. That doesn't mean you're meant to do it. It doesn't mean it's literal. And also the kinds of messages that come through, I notice, are very different. So I believe that these medicines reveal us. And not just revealing our shadows and our fears and our egos and our things like that, as a lot of people have discussed around the Aubrey situation. But that they also, how do I put this as clearly as possible? They also reveal our soul path. Because there is something that I am deeply, invaluably, irrevocably grateful to my ex-husband for. And it is that he set me free. And the safety and the softness and the feeling of, oh my God, my nervous system can relax. I don't have to spend emotional bandwidth managing the emotional climate, etc. I had no idea how much that was impacting me. And I can see, again, on a soul level, how this was all divinely orchestrated. So there is that piece. It's not to take away from that. Let's say with Aubrey and Vilana and Alana, that it can all be divinely orchestrated exactly on time. And that has nothing to do with me. And yet at the same time, it has everything to do with me and you and us and the collective, because it is pointing and activating these deeper conversations, these deeper inquiries about what are we open to receiving from spirit? How are we receiving that? How are we filtering that? Through which lens are we filtering that? Are we practicing the spiritual discernment? Or are we taking it at face value and clinging on to a vision that we saw on a journey and making that our new reality and basing our whole reality around that? And then our actual human reality aligns with that. Because let me tell you right now, the vision that my ex-husband had about having me and this other woman as wives, it didn't come true. It did not come true. And it's not coming true. And there are so many pieces to this deepening into your discernment that literally just begin with being willing to question it, question the message that you receive when you're on the journey or in the meditation, and not to be skeptical or fearful. Because when you bring more fear into that space, you're amplifying that energy. And then that tends to kind of hook its way into you. And then it's like, becomes almost paralyzing of, well, what do I do? So inquiring from a place of curiosity and love. And also looking at, okay, well, what am I creating in this human life? Is this aligned with that? Is this something that's meant to reveal more of my ego and more of my, the cracks in my vessel? So again, I invite you in this to zoom way out beyond the perspective of this is right or wrong or good or bad. If we can just see it for what it is. If I did not have the capacity to do that, I'm telling you, I would not have been able to cope with this divorce. I would not have been able to uncouple with grace and peace and certainty that we were all going to be okay. And it's taken me this long, right? A year and a half, to even speak to this piece. And I do want to thank the Aubrey Marcus podcast for bringing this piece to light, because this has been another hot topic or subtopic of conversation around what came up in his podcast about his relationship or relationships. And so again, it's not about relationship structure or the plant medicine itself. It's about practicing spiritual discernment. And the other piece to this is that it's not even that, let's say in my case, that anything went not according to plan. So it's not that, let's say, if he had some other kind of spiritual discernment that we wouldn't be divorced. It's like that was exactly what needed to happen for us to go our separate ways and be in the timelines that we were both here to be in. So this is a much bigger conversation, more complex conversation. But if you are in the middle, here's the juice, okay? If you're in the middle of a big life choice, or you are receiving messages from spirit, from source, from God, from your guides, however you are perceiving this, telling you to do something that causes your throat to drop into your gut, I would question that. If the universe tells you you are no longer responsible for parenting, fathering, mothering your children, I would question that. That's it. I would question it. And again, from love, not from fear, not from oh my God, am I being psychically attacked? Are the entities on me? Don't feed that fear. Don't fuel that fear. Ground yourself. I cannot say that enough. Whatever helps you to be grounded into your body, into this reality, into your life, into the day-to-day mundane stuff, ground yourself, because that's the other piece. If you're always floating out here and you're not anchored in, you're going to float away. These are some really delicate issues too, because a lot of this can present as mental health challenges. But the root of it, I believe, comes down to that spiritual discernment and being anchored into the reality that your soul chose to come into this human experience for. And then we can zoom way out and see that everyone's playing their role. Everyone's right on time for their casting call, so to speak. And it's all playing out as designed. But that doesn't justify us disconnecting from our human experience and bypassing that in the name of a higher truth. We are called to hold both realities equally. One is not greater than the other. That's when we suffer, when we think that what we see in the 3D is all that there is, and we forget the eternal, divine, zoomed out perspective. But also, maybe we don't suffer as much, but the people in our lives may suffer if we're only out here in the zoomed out eternal perspective, thinking we have all the time in the world to mother or father our children, and we're not missing out, and any pain created can be easily forgiven and forgotten. And we detach from the human experience. That also creates suffering. So my invitation to you through this is to hold both realities, stay grounded and anchored in. Practice your spiritual discernment. And one other piece, do not be afraid to receive downloads and information. In fact, one thing that I have set out as an intention for many years now is that when I am channeling, or I do open myself to receive from just to channel, I make a very clear intention that I'm only available for what is in service to the highest love. Because there's a lot in the field. There's a lot, okay? And I don't want to tap into and be channeling those more dense energies. I'm not available for that. What I am available for is what is in service to the highest love. What aligns with that, bring it on, baby. I want to see it. I want to feel it. I want to connect with that vision. And that has been a practice of mine for many years. While anchoring, I visually anchor, I imagine myself anchoring into these roots, like these roots of light, into the earth. Big, fat, strong oak tree, redwood tree, however you want to define this kind of tree, maybe for you, that is solid. That when the storms come, that tree isn't flailing around like a flimsy little palm tree. It's rooted, discerning, wise, tapped into this deeper truth, this deeper wisdom. And I feel like that is what we need more of, especially right now. So I will leave it at that. Thank you for listening. This is I would love to hear what you're getting from this. And again, not making this a conversation about relationship dynamics or plant medicine or being ungrounded or whatnot, or making wrong choices. None of that. But how does this apply to you in your practice of discernment and in your practice of being anchored in and rooted in love? All right, thank you for tuning into this episode. And until next time, here's to liberating your wild feminine heart.